remember when I still was young and the sun, I knew hardly any worries. Now the story's changed and all is fading away. Won't you stay until the daybreak? And I loved 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 till I ran out of love. And I loved 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 till I ran out of love. And I learned 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 till my lesson was learned. Pictures, pictures, black and white, fade away. Hold on, you'll get over it someday. Pictures, pictures, black and white, fade away. Hold on, you'll get over it someday.
Midagi mädagi männake, hibadi kobadi kokku mingu, midagi mädagi mätta tõusu taevas tõusu.
It's 12 o'clock noon here in Paide, Estonia. For these who are watching us online, it's a fact that we are here in Paide. It's not some kind of performance. Truthful information will be aired from here, and we will talk about misinformation, disinformation, the lies that are spreading around the world, around us. And we have very great panel to do that. Also have a chance to hear about two countries, our neighboring countries in the European Union, Poland and Hungary, what is going on there, because examples how the misinformation and disinformation is spreading there are really stark at some time. And from Lithuania, we have Nerijus Maliukevicius, who is following as a scientist the spread of disinformation. But first of all, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Neeme Raud. I'm a journalist here in Estonia. And the panelists. Monika Szafrańska is from Poland, analyst at Polish fact-checking organization Demagog, and scholar at the Jagiellonian University in Kraków.
Yes.
So, a few words from you.
Hello, thank you very much for having me. I hope I am heard. Well, what can I add? That's true. There's no need to fact check you.
Yeah.
Yes, I actually, right now I am not, technically I am not working with Demagog. I used to work with them. Now I'm more of a collaborator. And I am focusing on my scientific studies. I am, as you said, the scholar at the Jagiellonian University. I am a doctoral student. And my PhD thesis is dedicated to fact-checking, of course. Fact-checking in Poland. I am actually studying the fact-checking landscape in Poland, its functions, its role in democracy, and fighting disinformation. So I hope I will be able to deliver some insight from Poland, and not only the disinformation that's in Poland, but also the methods of fighting it.
Because Poland is a very interesting case to study, because the earlier government really was using all propaganda channels to spread a lot of disinformation. And now, as we hear, the problem is that the new government has turned things back, but the trust is missing somehow still, and the rebuilding trust is very, very hard. So this will be a great case study to focus also. But from Hungary, very glad to have here Márta Pardavi. We emailed several times when I went to Budapest to do a story about how the independent journalism is struggling, and the Hungarian Helsinki Committee, where Márta is co-chair, is really on the forefront of fighting those mistruths, and it's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.
And Hungary, of course, is an example. As of this week, I read several articles where this info war against their own people is ongoing.
Exactly. It's my second time here at the festival. I was here 5 years ago. And just in the matter of 5 years, I think, as many people will know, there's been quite a lot of what is often termed backsliding in Hungary. When it comes to disinformation, I think it is a special case somewhat in the European Union. We often talk about external foreign influences. Russia,
China.
Mostly China. And I often find that when governments, institutions are trying to address this, they think about how to identify and contain that, push back against it. In Hungary, the main source of disinformation is the government, and my taxpayer money is funding that. So I think this is a democracy issue, not only for Hungarians, but for everybody in the European Union. And it's also a security issue, and it's very closely linked. So it is, I think, a case study. It is also a headache, and it's a headache that is not going away, apparently.
So we have a chance to hear more about what's going on in Hungary. But Nerijus Maliukevicius is from Lithuania, political science lecturer and researcher at Vilnius University. And you are also studying and dealing with the explosion of disinformation in the world.
First of all, thank you for inviting to this festival. I'm first time here. We in Lithuania had a similar festival. Unfortunately, this year they are skipping this organization, so I'm here in Estonia. I had experience to be a participant of such a festival in Czech Republic, in Ostrava, so it's really a good thing that we have those discussions with the public, with those who are affected by disinformation and all this misleading information and challenges. From my perspective, I'm studying this from back 2000s. And I'm following probably the evolution of those challenges. Years ago, together with colleagues in Estonia, we were looking on what Putin is really doing with all this propaganda stuff, all this doctrine of information security and so on. Then we turned into thinking about how to counter all those challenges. But more and more now, I think for scientists and practitioners, the challenge is this new type of disinformation, and this is this digitalized propaganda. It's not just about artificial intelligence in this field. I would say it's about automation of lies, automation of disinformation, where you have more and more technical aspects malign technical aspects being put in place to really amplify the effects. And you have to think about how to counter this at the same technical level. So I think this is an ongoing research project that can be looked at.
Great. We can discuss those new challenges further also. And for our listeners, the weather is, as it is now, sunny, but it's cloudy. It might start raining. So if it starts raining, you can come and sit behind us. Since it's a TV broadcast and a web broadcast, we have to talk to this side. So if it's raining, we will have you on our back here if you want to listen to us. But welcome to Estonia, a country that is so pragmatic. And I think deep inside, almost every Estonian says, I'm smart enough, they can't lie, they can't misinform me. I will find out anyway, this disinformation. This is kind of inherent to us that we don't believe that we are lied. And then suddenly, look what happens in Great Britain this week. There are, this week, going on 3 big disinformation campaigns that are read. One in UK, we all read about those riots that started from internet, from the misinformation, disinformation that immigrants were behind those murders of those little girls, immigrant guy. The guy is from Rwanda, but he actually has lived in Britain for longer, but just little sparked this nationwide violence and campaign that is really hard to contain. And UK being a country that is really the first world democracy, and we see how this information can spread. Another example this week in Estonia, we discussed what happens in Mali. There was a military operation where those Prigozhin troops, the Wagnerian troops, got killed, and Russia started to spread information through their sources in Malian government that Ukraine is behind these killings, that Ukraine is encouraging terrorism in Africa, and therefore African nations should not support Ukrainian peace efforts. Again, information is planted and spreading. Today I read that Iran is planning a huge disinformation campaign in the United States about Mideast conflict, Palestinian-Israeli conflict now before the American elections. So we read almost every day that this is going on, and still we believe that we cannot be fooled. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts?
100% agree. We all have this tendency to think that we are immune. It has much to do with the confirmation bias, which is extra driven by the algorithms on social media that put us in the information bubbles in which we only get information that we want to see. But what all these cases that you spoke about have in common, there's one more thing I believe, is that it shows very well how the disinformation and propaganda machine works and what techniques it uses. And one of such techniques is using the country cases that are sensitive, that are discussed in a given society. Well, recently there was a report from this, sorry, I hope I will not mess the name, this European Union agency,
okay, that deals with
services agency something, sorry, I forgot the name. It was on the, it studied the example of such a disinformation technique that disinformators pretend to be the professional media, but like, let us leave it. I just want to point to one conclusion that was there, that because it was a case study from different European Union countries like Poland, Italy, Germany, France, and a few others, and it showed that the most popular disinformation topics in different countries were like super proportional to the topics that are the most sensitive and the most discussed in a given country. So, for example, in France, it was migration. In Germany, it was the climate and energy crisis. In Poland, the refugees from Ukraine, and so on and so on. I think.
So in other words, the topics that are in media are really the topics that the disinformation campaign tries to address.
I would say even more. These are the topics that people as a society are very sensitive about. So, for example, in Nordic countries, the climate is such an issue. In Sweden, there is a lot of disinformation about Greta Thunberg. I believe that in your country, you can point a lot of examples. I don't know what it could be in Estonia, but I think like all of you can answer for yourself. I know there are people from different countries, and it's no different in UK. Like this migration is really causing people to discuss and to argue, unfortunately. So this is what disinformators take to spread not only disinformation, because disinformation is like a very strict concept, but there is more. There is hate speech. There are many different manipulations based on.
For example, in Poland, let's bring concrete examples where this summary setting, we want blood on the stage. So
yes, in Poland. It's basically Ukraine, and
so what kind of lies they're spreading about? That they're coming to our country, taking our jobs?
Yes, for example, there is a lot of disinformation and manipulation on the refugees from Ukraine. But, for example, they come and take a job. That at the beginning of the war, there was so much talked about that these are not actually Ukrainians. These are people from Africa. That through Ukraine they want to get to the West. Like recently, I was observing on my own social media a lot of Ukraine Olympics disinformation. Let me put it that way. So, for example, when some Ukrainian athlete or athletes win a medal, especially the gold medal, there are a lot of comments like, so these are these healthy men that Ukraine is sending to the war. So where is that war? Where is that war is another huge part of the disinformation. There is so much talk that it is faked, that it is staged, and so on and so on. I think it was the case in many countries. So by the way, it is a huge contradiction because at the same time there are disinformations that the war in Ukraine is staged and faked. But at the same time, we hear that there is a war, but people don't want to fight on it. So, these things aren't really in line with each other. By the way, during the pandemic, we were observing very similar tactics. You could see the fake news that the coronavirus was produced in a laboratory, but 3 tweets later, you could read that it exists and it is to depopulate the humanity. Well, it is not a coincidence. It's not a mistake, because one of the goals of disinformation is to confuse us, to mislead us, for us not to know eventually what is wrong, what is true, what is wrong. And even between people who are actually, who have, for example, tendency to believe in conspiracy theories, they even can argue with each other. It is still good for the disinformation machine, because fake news is not a goal in itself when we talk about disinformation. It is to polarize the society, to polarize people, to cause them to argue, to scream at each other in the comments under the posts on social media.
Create a chaos.
Yes, exactly.
So what about Lithuania?
I mean, we have similar issues, but maybe I would...
So what are those hot buttons the disinformation architects
we are having elections this autumn, and the hot button now is Olympics. And you know how different parties see, you know, boxing events that everyone is discussing. How politicians and candidates from some political parties are positioning themselves morally and ideologically on those issues, and so on. But I would maybe want to counter this idea that, you know, we just through examples we can have a better picture. I think this whole picture that we are entering now with all this disinformation environment is, well, a very scary one. I don't want to be a doomsday kind of a predictor, but I think we are entering digital Middle Ages more and more.
What that means?
What that means is that we are basically, we don't have tools and capacities, technical and psychological, to deal with all this ongoing new technological avalanche that enters information realm. Social networks, artificial intelligence, and so on and so on. And, you know, we are basically, there's this quote, we are going with a car straight into, you know, high speed and looking into this back mirror, thinking that, you know, old ways, old media consumption ways will help us understand reality better. I would add that while discussing disinformation, we are more and more putting blame on malign actors, while at reality, the whole complex situation is because we are living through this media evolution or media revolution situation. And we are actually discussing now those you know, wildfires with fake news spreading around, because it's very easy to just, you know, hit this emotional button with one post, you know, amplify it by algorithms, then, you know, not knowing what to do with it, share it, and in the end, we have a situation where disinformation kills, or disinformation, you know, steals your health because you basically is misled and so on. And when you put additionally malign actors on top of that, you basically have a powder cake situation where it can, you know, get into very explosive outcomes. So I would urge to see this kind of a wider picture and not to concentrate that the things that we are dealing with are coming from outside, from those malign actors, and they are kind of putting all the influence and so on. There are many, you know, internal players, as mentioned already, but, you know, in many cases, everyone is trying to get a grip of this new media environment. You know, politicians thinking, oh, I can use those cases for my political campaigning. You know, people are putting things into their moral compass and then filtering out information that benefits them and so on. So we are kind of in an unknown situation with new media reality.
So this is the paradox of today, that we have much more information available to us.
Absolutely.
But that makes us sometimes less informed.
And for many, this is a big challenge, actually.
What to do?
I mean, we will learn it in a time, you know, but we have to basically individually maybe learn our individual mistakes when we make misjudgment, right? Believing straight away into one kind of a post or the other, and think through ourselves, you know, how not to be misled in future. But psychologically, some people tend not to accept this mistake and just look into, I would say, into Russian society, where they are bombarded with this mythology of special operation, to accept internally that you were misled and you are part of, war effort makes you, psychologically very depressed, right? So, I mean, there are multiple layers in this. Definitely, governments need to help out with this, new media reality, and many things need to be done, especially with big corporations and social networks, because, those algorithms are just the driver of all those cases that we are speaking about. But it will take time, the same as with traditional media, decades ago.
So we are in the middle of experiment with us as humans.
Yeah.
You said the governments have to take a role, but let's go to Hungary. Government itself is misleading us. So I read about the British riots, and they said the local journalist and the local level journalism is more important than ever to explain people what's really going on. I, as a journalist here, try every day to explain people as well as I understand the truth, what's going on. But then in Hungary, the government prohibits this kind of independent journalism. And there is no local independent journalism. The government tells you that if you see dog and they say it's cat, the media says, yes, it's cat. Is it that bad?
It's not that bad. It's very stark. So Hungary is really one of the worst places, I think, in Europe for independent government critical journalists, individual journalists, and also media outlets. But it is not completely impossible. But you really have to make an effort as a reader, as a member of the audience, to find credible news. And most people will not make that effort. So very often, the most accessible news media become really government propaganda media. And this is, I don't know, is this laziness? Is this just a human spirit? This is the way we're built? People will very often take what they are fed. It's also interesting, I think, in a region where during communism, a lot of people were brought up not to believe anything, right? You didn't believe the propaganda. You knew that everything was false. There was a lack of credibility. And then in the past, say, 30 years, there should have been an evolution. But apparently, it's very easy to undo these democratic achievements. And so I think as an independent journalist in Hungary, you have a lot of issues, both in terms of accessing sources. You don't have access to government people. You would never have an open discussion where people can just easily walk in. And I think this is a great example of the kind of spaces that are needed. But also, independent journalists and also their media outlets are being smeared. So the credibility is being undermined through various ways, various measures. One of them is through propaganda, and that would be, I think, categorized in the disinformation domain. But now we've seen how the Hungarian government party, Fidesz, and affiliates of Fidesz have spent over just in a matter of few months during the election campaign leading up to the European Parliament and local elections on the 9th of June in Hungary, they've spent over 4 million euros just on social media political advertising. So in a country of that size with a budget issue deficit of which is quite problematic now, 4 million euros being spent on social media just to promote propaganda messages is amazing. And I think Hungary really topped EU rankings in this. The Hungarian government party, Fidesz, was one of the biggest promoters of certain ads on Google, for example. So when it comes to the social media platform's responsibility, I think it's really important to address that. But the other thing that is happening in Hungary, and that's, I think, a new way, is not only to portray in the public domain certain actors as purveyors of anti-Hungarian values, anti-Hungarian trends, putting them under a label of not serving Hungary's interest, but serving foreign interest, but to create an office that has an official label now, which is, I think, a new...
Sovereignty Protection
and
Office.
it's called the Office to Protect the National Sovereignty, which creates reports coming under an official heading, which now, just about a month ago, released a report about disinformation narratives. And under the guise of an official authority, it actually just fuels and amplifies the propaganda messages. And it portrays independent outlets, most of the Hungarian independent mainstream outlets, as purveyors of war propaganda.
Let me stop you here, but I want your comments. I just found this great quote that kind of explains what this new office is doing a little better from The Guardian, just a few days ago. And I'll just quote. The newspaper wrote, while discussing disinformation, getting far less attention abroad, however, has been a flurry of activity inside Hungary, targeting independent journalism and watchdog groups. At the center of this crackdown is this new Sovereignty Protection Office. The office was set up by Orban government formally to monitor foreign influence, very similar to Russia, where they started to put this label of the foreign agent. But in practice, critics say it's serving not as independent state body, but a tool to apply pressure on government critics. I was in Hungary, the correspondent says, and so how it's going on. For example, news stories quoting figures such as European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, Czech President, or US Ambassador in Hungary are getting really categorized as Western disinformation narratives. At the same time, stories from Russia are categorized as truth coming. So the picture is really hard to understand.
Yes, it is often surreal. I lead a human rights organization in Hungary, and we've been working for many years on rule of law and civil society space so that people and their organizations would be free to exercise their right to freely associate. And this is just another brick in the wall, as one could say. And so it's not only the Russian-inspired propaganda messages and the style of the hostile narratives, but the institutions and the laws that are being adopted in Hungary that is very concerning. What also concerns me is that this is not only happening in Hungary. So within the European Union, we see how this is being now adopted. It's interesting that in the EU we have a single market, right? You can buy things from another member state, you can go and work in another member state. Well, it's very easy also to adopt policies and laws from another member state. And to say then, as the Hungarian government often says, well, look, the same thing is happening in France. What is, of course, a lie is that it's not the same thing that's happening in France. When you have a strong, solid constitutional framework, a well-working democracy, with institutions such as a free media, such as free independent courts, then even if you have one bad law, these other institutions will be able to counterbalance that tendency. What happened in Hungary is that these new laws come amid a framework that has already been eroded. I think the last remnants are still the courts to some extent, civil society, and independent media. And I think it is really important to highlight how these institutions are coming under pressure from the Hungarian government itself. And this is why Hungary doesn't have access still to billions of European Union funding. So it is not only about, narratives, about style, about inspiration, but actually the institutions that are meant to safeguard our democracy, which are being eroded. And I think this, as you can often see, Mr. Orban, the Hungarian Prime Minister, is quite proud to present this Hungarian illiberal informational autocracy as an example for others. And there's a big interest in not only looking at what is happening in Hungary, but also adopting that. So I think the question for us Europeans is also, do we have good enough, strong means in the European Union to protect us against this very easy cross-border import-export of these illiberal practices.
So you said adopting it. Who is the adopters?
Well, it's very often when we talk about tropes, right, hostile narratives, so it's often immigration. Another one is about LGBTQ rights. And we've seen how often minorities themselves are the first ones who come under pressure and are being targeted by these disinformation narratives. They're used as a platform to further these narratives. And so Hungary adopted a law in 2021 that targets the public portrayal of LGBTQ people. It's very similar to what has been adopted in Russia a few years before that. The Hungarian version doesn't criminalize, but it does attach a fine, for example, to book publishers or bookstores that make available information or books, be they fiction or non-fiction books, that mention LGBTQ subjects.
A great example is the musical Billy Elliot that was staged in the Hungarian opera and was banned before premiere.
Or books that are have to be wrapped, and this is really very surreal, that have to be wrapped in bubble wrap or in plastic foil in bookstores to protect the rights of children, the safety of children. So this is always the
sounds like pornography early days in America. It was
exactly, yes. And so now this Hungarian law also made it almost impossible to talk about this issue in Hungarian schools. It has not only banned the topic from the curriculum, but has also outlawed civil society from basically doing sex education, information activities in schools. Same law, very similar on this educational part, is adopted in Bulgaria just 2 days ago. Foreign agent law, branding foreign-funded, also EU-funded civil society organizations. We know this from Russia, the original law from 2012.
Georgia is doing now that.
Then 2017, Hungary. Now Georgia. But of course, the idea is floating around and not too far away in Slovakia too. Mm-hmm. And also, we see how this very often comes up at the EU policy level too. So I think we have to be really mindful. Exactly as you said about not looking at these symptoms only, I think we should also address them, but also to look at why these are happening and what it means for me as a human rights person is that it undermines people's human rights, our safety, our security, our democracy, the democracy's security. And this is why I think it's important to have a conversation that not only looks at it from a media angle, from a civil society angle, from a security angle, but where all this comes together. I think it's starting to rain.
So you are now invited to the stage behind us, but we will continue and move to Poland. Poland was really criticized for years. The previous government and its policies toward media, especially the state TV and the state channels, were used as propaganda. Now Poland has decided to turn this over, but you said before we started that it's really hard to build back people's trust.
Yes.
Because when Donald Tusk came to power, one of the things was right away to change the TV leadership, right?
So maybe I will start with making one thing clear. Both previous and the current government are extremely pro-Ukrainian and anti-Russian, so the state-run propaganda was never pro-Russian. So at least it's not as bad as in Hungary.
Yes.
Maybe I will start with giving a little bit of a context and the historical background, because I believe most of you don't follow the media system development in Poland. So you are referring to the period between 2015 and 2023 when Poland was ruled by the Law and Justice government. This is a conservative right-wing party. And state media fell under its control. State media in Poland always were controlled by the government and always were rather pro-governmental. However, under this period, it became almost like a parody. I was lucky to be born already in a free Poland, but the way state media looked back at this time gave me a sample of what it was back in the communist era. Just to give you some examples of what was happening in the state media, it was obviously extremely pro-governmental. Opposition either wasn't there at all, or it was presented only in a bad way, and everything that government was doing was good, and opposition was always only messing and waiting for an occasion to basically destroy Poland, to sell it to Germany.
And that's in the main evening news.
Yes, like the main news program, 7:30 p.m. It was like a political campaign for the ruling party. The state media were extremely anti-LGBT plus people, anti-migrants. There were a lot of campaigns against these two groups, and many others. These are just the most extreme examples. Another things that were happening was, for example, causing problems to the private media. We had a situation when the biggest commercial TV station, which was rather pro than opposition, had huge problems with getting the license. Eventually, it did get it, but the government was doing its best to block this TV station. Another thing was the situation when a state-owned petrol company bought the network of the local newspapers and news portals and turned them into the propaganda machine. So, these 8 years were really harsh and hard for the media system in Poland. It changed last year. We had elections, and the coalition of then opposition parties won under the leadership of the Civic Platform. And they promised to turn back some of this negative phenomenon. And they are trying. However, if you asked me about it yesterday, I would have been much more positive. However,
What changed overnight?
Literally yesterday, a thing happened. There is, of course, in Poland, there is also this big discussion about Iman Khalif, this Algerian boxer. And a journalist from TVP, which is the main 24-hour news station, invited two experts to discuss on this topic. One of them is a scholar from my university, Jagiellonian University. She's a lawyer, so a very, very good person to discuss on gender and sex topics. She's known for very transphobic speeches and views. And another person is a scientific, again, I am taking it, a scientific blogger who is also known for spreading so much transphobic disinformation and things that I will not even repeat here. And these were the only experts that were invited there. And of course, they spread their theses on air, on live TV. So it is changing for better. Like, we can see that the state media are trying, are much more plural. There are representatives of different parties invited, and they are given an equal time to discuss. And it looks better. However, still such things happen that make you think like, why can it be better? Why can it be good?
But you said also that it's hard to rebuild trust, that people expect that the TV is doing propaganda.
Yes, this is another thing that I wanted to speak about, is that there are a lot of voices, even among experts and people with liberal views, that, well, it just turned the other way. That during the Law and Justice government, TVP or state media were pro-law and justice, so now there will be pro-civic platform, as it used to be before, because, as I said, the state media more or less were always pro-governmental, but never to such an extent. So a lot of people are like, I don't even want to watch this because I know that not much has changed. Another thing is that because the state media were watched and read and listened mostly by conservative people voting for conservative parties, basically the law and justice. Now, as the agenda changed, they don't want to watch it anymore. And we have another private television. It is called Telewizja Republika, the Republic TV, which is extremely far-right, extremely conservative, anti-migrants, anti-LGBT plus community. And a lot of people who used to watch and listen to the state media before now turn to this television. So it's even worse because the state media had this ambition to stop the polarization and to gain people, to show people that the open-mindedness and the open discourse, open debate are possible and so on. But the society is already so polarized that it feels almost like it's too late to rebuild the need to discuss, to have an open debate, because people are like, okay, the state media changed, they don't talk the way I want them to talk, so I will go somewhere else, somewhere where I can hear what I want to hear and listen to what I want to listen.
And you can go to internet and find like
yes, that's another option.
examples. But let's bring this discussion back to the Russian disinformation. And Nerijus, in the Baltic states, we all know that Russia is waging campaigns. So your research, your studies, so how they are trying to get into our heads?
I mean, the main point probably would be that Kremlin is not creating their own reality for us. They are opportunistic in nature of their strategy. So that means that they are scanning the situation, the environment in Baltic states as well as in other, as they perceive, opponent societies, and they try to use and leverage those cleavages for their benefit. So this means that you really kind of look into what drives the emotions, the moral panic situations in those in those societies, and then you amplify those polarizing messages. And it actually can be on both extremes. It can be on far right, far left, or any extreme of moral spectrum. And then you put more and more this digital aspect into it. And this is what I'm researching more and more with my colleagues, because we see, campaigns, for example, like a ghostwriter campaign going on in Baltic states, where Kremlin is basically targeting NATO troops, strengthening of our NATO border with Russia, and they are doing this specifically with automated means. So they are creating not just fake stories, they are creating fake authors, fake information portals to spread the messages, fake basically narratives and so on. And more and more you see this technology being put in place. So just to give you a simple example, fake authors write a fake story with the help of artificial intelligence, where you just need to put a dividing prompt into the system, and you will get the whole, simplified article or op-ed about this. Then it is put into the artificially created portal, which usually has a kind of a catchy name like Baltic Word News or something like that, and then you basically put even the text of it into synthesized voiced video materials and spread further, and then you use trolls and bots to amplify the message, and suddenly you realize that it's just about creative thinking behind disinformation campaigns, where you really need to have creative brains of how to really do this kind of campaigning. And Thomas Reed, who analyzed Soviet-type, Russian-type active measures, активные мероприятия, he called those guys creative engineers. Engineers in the sense that in the end, you don't need to have much of a human input in different elements when you have the whole concept and then you put technical, machinery into it.
You mentioned the NATO troops. I was stunned when Estonian Prime Minister, former Prime Minister, was in our town, and the woman from the audience said that there is a fact that the NATO troops are raping Estonian women, especially the colored guys from Africa. And we were all stunned, but then it was investigated, it was lies. So, I'm sure on internet you find ways to prove this. Nobody has ever heard of it, but suddenly somebody spoke out to the Prime Minister, what's going on?
So that's the whole effect of such kind of operation. So there's the whole story of how the fake rape stories were spinned in the Baltic states. Even before 2016, there were Russian media personalities that were spinning this story of alleged NATO crimes and rapes that will happen if you decide to invite more, you have troops. And then it were put into those information bubbles on social networks, and people got stuck with this, fear-mongering stories, and then they are repeating themselves. In Lithuania, we had a fake story under ghostwriter operation that allegedly German troops raped a Lithuanian girl, and it was then spinned and so on. So you can tell all those examples, all those details. They are quite academically interesting to get deeper into this. But the whole point, I think, is really to realize that what you were mentioning, that we are challenged by, illiberal alliance that are using very similar toolkit of all those sovereignty things, sovereign democracy, sovereign information space, and then later all the political steps and so on. And then to counter that, you really have to create, your own alliance where you realize that, in Estonia and in Lithuania, we have similar campaigns. And then we need to network ourselves how to deal with those campaigns to better, counter them, and so on and so on. So the networking, in military strategy, there is this idea of networked warfare. Mm-hmm. So you really have to think about how you really counter those in effective networks of, same fellow experts, fellow institutions, and so on.
And it's also interesting how well is the Russian long KGB history playbooks are still used. One of my favorite examples from the earlier era was the report that Russians planted it was in 1980s when the AIDS was starting to be a big problem. They planted a little article in Indian newspaper that AIDS is actually invented in American laboratories and used in Africa and for racist purposes. And they waited 2 years. Mm-hmm. And after 2 years, they started to plant this story, quoting this Indian newspaper around the world, and suddenly it became a big story around the world. Mm. But there is another example how Russians themselves can be misled. When I was a correspondent in Moscow, there was a rumor on internet that in Brussels there was a sex orgy for elderly people. And almost all Russian newspapers published this news item on the front page. And then it was found out that somebody just posted a lie. They said, okay, but the need for this kind of damaging information from West was so big that they just tried to publish it. So, they're getting it sometimes wrong also. Mm-hmm. But how to fight it? How to survive in this thing? We've been drawing this very stark picture, but strategies, how to survive. Fact-checking. We see fact-checking everywhere, but usually winner, as Donald Trump has shown us, is the one who says it first. A lot of people are lazy to check it later and all that. So your thoughts, how we can go on from here?
Maybe if I could just have this intro into the whole discussion on resilience. I mean, one has to be realistic and not to expect a momentum solution or a silver bullet solution in this whole situation. As I mentioned, we are entering this new media information realm where we will be objectively challenged by all the issues, and then only comes malign actor aspect of it. So I think the best approach is long-term policy decisions and institutional arrangements and so on and so on.
Like what? Like what?
Like, for example, in Lithuania, we followed French and American approach. We created a National Center for Crisis Prevention, which deals with multiple, potential crises, but information-wise as well. So those disinformation campaigns that tend to create, panic mood and so on are constantly monitored and then reacted to it. And the most important part is that you actually keep this resilience in all layers. So it's not just that you have this institutional arrangement. It's a question that each individual has to really prepare himself for this kind of new future, right? So and realize that because of disinformation, he can lose money, he can lose health, or he can lose his life if he really misjudges the reality that is presented in those information caves and bubbles that he is stuck in, right? So it's about a multi-layer aspect and long-term. And then we can get into each aspect bit of it, but it has to be in its place. So journalists have to still do their job of really, editing and filtering out the lies and so on. I mean, really, politicians and political institutions have to protect democratic processes and institutions, elections, media plurality, and so on. Each has to do its part, and this is the whole idea of pluralistic democratic society. And we are targeted by those, malign actors, not just by those nasty brands, names for different groups of society, but strategically they target our arrangements, democratic arrangements. One of experts from Asia in our discussion, one of the discussions on those issues, said that those illiberal alliances are demolishing our democratic processes layer by layer. So you start by saying that, well, we need to protect our information realm, like Putin did back in 2002 with information security doctrine. And then you throw into the idea of sovereignty in, sovereign democracy, sovereign information space, and so on. Then you share the ideas that you can really use those, analogies of Agents Act to go after. But the whole idea is that then one of the layers is basically being broken in the whole democratic system. And
courts, of course.
You
can say courts are biased.
And my point is that we shouldn't go after those, moral battles of different kind, internal, external, disinformation topics, and so on. If a democratic system is resilient enough, then they will be what they are, just, moral battles. And they will not have a deeper effect on our institutional arrangements, democratic arrangements. So this is the core that we need to protect, and this is what builds resilience.
But it also puts a responsibility to us, to each individual,
Absolutely.
to be informed and to try to be as informed. I think money is a great example. When people start thinking about losing their money, they will get informed.
I usually say it's you learn by pain. One way to really learn is that, well, I just shared the fake news, but, whatever, But when you basically lose money or you lose, I don't know, your status because, you became a fake personality and so on, that is something that one has to really cherish maybe and then change their positions, right?
Márta.
So this.
Your recipes, solutions.
So I really agree with what you said. So there's no silver bullet. It would be nice, but that would be naive. And so this is, as you said, it really undermines our democratic institutions, and the resilience needs to address all these institutions. I think there's been recognition of the problem, and there are some first steps taken already. For example, in the European Union, we have now better rules. They're not perfect, but they're better than nothing, about exposing political advertisements and the money that is being spent on them and the sources of these funds. I think that's very important. Another thing is better protection for journalists, individual journalists, to protect them better against, for example, these lawsuits that target their work. SLAPs, these strategic lawsuits against public participation. Also, more focus on how to create a more resilient, sustainable business models and independent journalism. But the media aspect is important, but it will not solve the issues. So I think we need a lot more focus on, in general, this defense of democracy, in the sense that of not only defending it from external threats, but also what can we do to ensure that our courts stay free and independent, that we have courageous journalists who can do their job, that we have civil society organizations who will stand up to protect human rights to protect people against human rights violations, whether they happen outside in some other part of the world or here at home, and beyond the building of institutions and making sure that they can still operate, I think really need leadership. And the political leadership is very difficult, I think, to take when we have polarized societies where we have these very perhaps savvy messages targeting our weakest points, our most sensitive points in society. It's very rare that you would see a politician stand up and take a position which is to protect a minority. It is really not. So it doesn't seem to be popular enough to stand up for democracy and human rights. And since these threats are undermining these core values, this is what we should be all very proud of as Europeans. But these threats are undermining that. If we don't have Democrats stand up for these values, we will not have the individuals really starting to take time and effort to learn, to identify, to discuss. And so the political leadership, I think, really is something that we should all call for. It's not just on certain particular issues, but in general for this value basis that
But
we
you have a strong leader in Hungary.
Certainly, and I think Mr. Orbán would always say that he is to protect Europe and European values against non-European external threats. I wholeheartedly disagree with his approach. I think our European values are really something to cherish, to be proud of. This is what keeps us safe, to have a good society where everybody can feel safe. Not only those who certain populist politicians brand as part of a nation at the expense of others. And I think this divisive, exclusionary politics is really Mr. Putin loves this kind of discussion. It really helps to divide Europe. What we need is for some other politicians to stand their ground and to also, I think, coalesce better in face of these very, very serious threats that are not going to go away.
So, Monika.
I'm having two things on my mind. First, a huge lesson that needs to be learned, first of all, by journalists and fact-checkers, but also by the civic society, government, and of course, the public, is to analyze the problem of disinformation on more of a meta level, because for now, we are mostly debunking like specific disinformation. Here's a fake news, here's a debunk. It's more like stopping the fire instead of preventing it. And we have tools to prevent disinformation. We discussed a lot of examples of the techniques that are used by Russian or Chinese disinformators. There are, of course, much more. There is a huge need that you mentioned to collaborate on more of an international level, because a lot of these techniques are used in different countries in an identical way or slightly different way, but we see similar patterns. So if we come together, we gather all these examples, we have really powerful tools to prevent disinformation attacks, because we will be able to predict them. There are already studies that show that so-called pre-bunking is a very, very useful tool. Pre-bunking comes from combination of pre and debunking. So it means that you realize that there might be some disinformation or manipulative narrative, and you analyze it, you debunk it before it hits, so that when people finally see this information, they already have information to verify it, to debunk it. It really works. We need to do more of it. But of course, it takes people, it takes time, and it takes this another thing that I want to speak about, a proper education. I don't know how much time we have left. I think this is another big topic that should be always discussed when we talk about disinformation. A proper media literacy education is a must-have. I know it probably sounds like a cliche, like of course we need education, but I really believe in a power of education. Media literacy education. I'm interested on what it looks like in your countries, but in Poland, it almost doesn't exist. Civic society organization, NGO organizations arrange workshops for schools. For example, the Demagog Association works on this topic. There are more organizations that go to school and teach young people or students at universities on how to recognize this information and verify it. However, once again, these are like point activities. We can reach single people, single groups. And if it was organized on the nation level, and every student, every kid would have to have a subject on it, a separate subject, it would be a completely different discussion now, I believe.
But it's important to stress it here.
Yes.
But I invite for questions. It's open now. People, if you want to ask from the audience, I think maybe there is a microphone we can pass. There is the lady with the red scarf. The microphone is not on. Okay.
Hey?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for very interesting discussion, but I have question to Monika and Márta. As Hungary, as you say, the information space is already controlled by government, and Poland came very near to this point that it is quite damaged. Then if you looking back retrospectively, then what could be done by media, by civil society, by educational, that it will make some difference and help to prevent what's happening now? Thank you.
Márta, maybe start with you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. Yes, it's a very important question. What if you could turn back time, what should have been done differently? So I think it's quite a meta question, but in the early 90s, in the glorious period right after the political changes, I think there was a lot of focus on building institutions, the legal changes. There was less focus on society. There was somehow it was, I think, assumed that people will be happy to benefit from the freedoms and it will just work. Of course, any kind of social change requires not only a mindset and the leadership, but also the resources. And so I think there was a lot less money actually and attention spent on education. Education reform that would focus on democratic citizenship, on what that actually means in all sorts of practical ways, not only in theoretical. So I think that's one form of investment that should have been done, and I think I absolutely agree it should still be done. Not only media literacy, but in general, what does it mean to be a citizen in a democracy, and how does democracy work for you, and in a very practical way. So I would invest in that. That investment was not done to the extent it should have. But also, I must say that in the Hungarian case, most of this comes not from a lack of appetite from citizens, but from a very well-crafted, sophisticated, conscious, top-down project. So it is the Hungarian illiberal model. It develops perhaps organically. It's not, I don't think it was, written like Project 25 is supposed to be written in the US. It was not written in that way. But there was certainly, I think, a different understanding of democracy, a very classic majoritarian democracy. People voted us into government, so we have the authority, the authorization to do what we would like because this is what people supported. This kind of understanding is, of course, present in many places. But I think this top-down nature caught a lot of organizations and citizens unaware. So we were simply not prepared. No one thought, that you can unravel democracy in such a rapid way.
So in Poland?
Well, Poland, even though there were these negative changes that I spoke about, Polish media and civic society landscape is still relatively diverse, and Poland is not North Korea. we have free media, we have opposition media. We used to have it back then. So it's not that the whole debate was dominated by the state media propaganda. There was still an open debate, open discussion, and there was a lot of discussion on media. I would say that even though it was horrible, it brought a positive effect because a lot of people opened their eyes on how important free media are, how important NGOs fighting for media freedom and the public discourse are.
And they voted at the last election.
Yes, and the fact that the government changed is the greatest proof that it worked, that people really realized that this is not okay, that was wrong, we really needed to change it. There were a lot of, under the Law and Justice rule, there were a lot of reports on how the state media manipulate, on the language, on the style, on the examples of disinformation or misinformation. NGOs were reacting a lot, for example, the groups supporting LGBT+ people were very active, and they very much raised during this period. Well, I don't want to praise, of course, the period under the Law and Justice government, but if we want to search for the bright side of this situation, it's that the organizations, the institutions, the media that were presenting how wrong it looked back then, they became more recognizable, more visible, and that's great. And there were a lot of initiatives for democracy, gathering people from different regions, from small villages to towns to big cities. They were coming together. There were a lot of protests, like, for example, black protests when the abortion law was really tightened. So basically now in Poland, it was always very harsh, but now in Poland, you can only have an abortion after the rape or when the child is supposed to die. Like before, you could have it also when the...
Would the new government turn it back somehow?
Quite recently, they wanted to do it. There was a law project, an act, on to return to the so-called abortion compromise from before. But that was a crazy situation because some of the deputy members of current ruling party just didn't come, didn't vote, and they didn't have the majority to push it. But yeah, this is a Polish insight.
But it's interesting that you're saying that this illiberal period really forced people to exercise democracy. I was in Japan just when the elections took in Poland place, and I met those Polish artists there, and they said, worldwide we feel it's our civic duty. Oops. Okay, thanks God, we are safe. To vote. So it was really mobilizing Poles around the world to vote against this illiberalism. So do you have any more questions? Yes, there are, please.
First of all, thank you for a great discussion. You've talked about every major topic that I could think of, except for one small aspect, which is about investment, right? You talked about resiliency and building tools to combat these very automated and highly technical attacks we're getting. I work for a large tech company and for many years in big tech. We are way more better positioned to help build the right tools. Now, how do you convince governments to give money on a multinational level without strings attached, without complete independence? Give money away to media outlets to build the proper tools that can combat these big threats.
I think you don't need to do a convincing here. I think now the realization in most cases and places is that you really need those automated tools to tackle automated disinformation, and that means that European red alert system that monitors the disinformation attacks has to be there, and so on. I mean, we are entering this realm from positive and negative perspectives. So, as usually, technology can be abused, but at the same time, technology can be used, positively. So I think, and I see that in Lithuanian case, there are different solutions, technological solutions to really, monitor, follow the situation. Only by that we can do. But it's in all cases, it's there are two aspects, more than two aspects, but mostly important aspects. So it's definitely technical solution, but then there's this creative, indigenous, human thinking behind how you, for example, do a disinformation campaign, or how you do a Stratcom campaign to counter, some disinformation. So you cannot skip the human aspect, and it goes, in concert.
Did I answer your question? You want to add something?
Well, one thing I want to just perhaps add to this is that there's a lot of discussion about the role of social media companies. That's just one type of tech industry, obviously, and what they have to do and what kind of regulations are appropriate to actually achieve the means that we want to. And I think there needs to be a lot broader discussion about that. Those NGOs that work on digital rights issues, on internet freedom, on privacy issues, are usually very, very weak. And I think they have a lot to add to this public policy discussion. So I would encourage creation of spaces and opportunities where they would have, a seat at the table and the ability to get involved at the right time in this policy making.
But how to bring this private sector, with their money and expertise and everything, into this table?
It's not only the private sector's money, it's the private sector's resistance very often to policies that are meant to safeguard us from not only threats, but also to safeguard our democracy. We see very much, and I think I should say it, there are very influential private sector actors. Elon Musk, for example, I'm not convinced that his personal position is so much aligned with democracy in general. Very often, of course, the free speech will be used as a card, as a wild card, but free speech is not unlimited. And so I think we can very easily see now, we started our discussion with of course, the riots in Britain, how free speech can actually fuel hatred and can trigger violence. And so people who have such an amount of uncontrolled power, global power, unaccountable mostly, really can stir things up. And I think there are a lot of people who want to think about how to contain this in a way that works for everybody, but they don't have a seat at the table, and that would be civil society very often.
Okay. We have one more question there.
Hi. I have a multi-part kind of just thought question. You guys get to talk a lot. I get to ask a quick question. It's hard to get it all. I'll try my best.
Sure.
So I guess I forget who here said something about we're kind of moving into a new era, and I would somewhat reject that idea, and I would say that we are in that era, and we've probably been in that era since circa 2008. If you look at the social sciences and the studies that have been done, and I'm in my mid-20s, for pretty much anybody that is later millennial, early Gen Z plus, we can talk about the mental health aspect to how this has all affected us, right? And there's very notable immediate impacts that this technology has had that we have not previously seen, right? All that being said, I forget who it is, but it was somebody in, I believe, Hitler's administration that made a joke famously about democracy, right? Where he says, it's the only system that was ever made that could destroy itself or something to that effect, right? I worry that there has been, and I'm curious if you guys have any perspective on it, feels to me that we could accept that there's kind of two different worlds that exist right now, in the physical and the digital world. We seem very willing to police the physical world, and we seem very unwilling to police the digital world. If I were to say, for example, in order to sign up for social media, you need to, in the same way that you use your smart ID to open a bank account, that needs to be attached to you. We need to have some idea. If I'm reading an article, did ChatGPT write this? Did Alexei in Moscow write this? Or did John in New Jersey? I need to know these things, but proposing these thoughts seems to be in the public conscious wrong. For lack of a better word, it seems to be something that we're pushing against. And I'm just kind of curious what your guys' perspective is on why it seems so hard to bring the conversation forward of policing this kind of second world that we're all now actively living in, whether we like it or not.
Thank you. Nerijus.
If I may, because, I mean, we can try to look into this period. Are we in this already, or are we living through this revolution? I mean, but that's not so much productive. My answer would be why it's so difficult exactly because of that, because it is so new, and we are trying sometimes to police or organize, new medias, new social network corporations with old technologies that were used for traditional media and so on. And I mean, that's because of this reason we are not yet there. I mean, and where we will end up, I don't even know, because with all the cases that we've discussed with those disinformation campaigns, be it in traditional media, that would be the filters of journalistic professionalism that would, filter that out. The filter of editor would filter all those misinformation. The filter of time scale, because you would spend all day researching the topic, and in the end, in the evening news, you would present the best analyzed case, and probably there would be least of disinformation and so on. And now everything is on this live circulation, including what you mentioned with all the aspects of social psychology and mental health. So and even looking into the situation with the war that we are faced in Ukraine. Basically, you spend first year, second year after full-scale invasion on constantly looking what is going on and so on. And sometimes personally, you just need to detach and change the routine. In my case, I turned one cycle back to media. I mean, I started looking into traditional media, evening news, not spending all time, just to constantly be agitated on what is going on, what is true or what is not. So it's not an answer, but that's a conversation that we are actually not yet fully grasp the whole situation and how to police it. Yeah.
Thank you. But finally, I would like to give a word to Márta, and then still this work that you're doing at the Hungarian Helsinki Committee really opened my eyes when I was in Hungary. And I started to think for the first time in my life what really is protection of democracy. But while you're doing it every day, it's so easy to kind of overuse the word democracy, and people start to think it's not even important, it's part of our life. How to keep those ideas kind of in focus and alive? You do it every day, but it's easy, like human rights, democracy, they are part of our life. We know they are overused. The people don't want to pay attention to those words, but it's important to pay attention.
I absolutely agree. So when it comes to health, most people do know that you have to take care of yourself in various ways, right? To prevent illness the best you can, you take vitamins, you change your lifestyle. So it does take conscious effort, but it is very accepted. It is trendy, right? So I wish we would feel the same way about our democracies, that you do have to do a lot of things, small things too, in your daily life. And it is something that your community looks on as a positive activity.
For example?
So I found the book by Timothy Snyder on tyranny really, really useful. Mm-hmm. This is more of I would make this actually part of a highly recommended reading for any 14 to 16-year-olds and beyond. And he talks about easy things that we can all do to preserve democracy. This was written in 2016, so quite a while ago. 2016, 17, and he says things like we should all, make sure how we use language. We should become active in our community. Being active in any kind of community activity is actually good for democracy. So it doesn't need to be about politics. It doesn't need to be about the divisive topics, gardening club, anything that where you experience the being together in a community and the difficulties that it brings and the choices where you have to walk through in a community. So this participation, public participation, is something really, I think, important to invest in, both personally and also as a society, something to happen. And also, he says, choose one thing that you really care about and invest in that. So everybody has one thing, at least, that they care about when it comes to democracy. It can be about certain communities and minority rights. It could be about media. It could be about supporting an independent media outlet at home or somewhere else. There is plenty to focus on, and I think these are very everyday vitamins we should be taking.
And participating at this festival is also
Absolutely.
one commitment to listen to those topics, discuss, and then think about them. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our time is up. The weather has been okay for us, so let's enjoy summery Paide as much as possible. The festival goes on. This discussion was organized by Open Estonian Society, Open Estonian Foundation. How it's Open Estonian Avatud Eesti Fund. So to conclude it, thank you very much, Mal Hellam, for inviting us here and raising this important topic for us all. Thank you and have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bottle of this up and and I said, why? And I didn't need you. And I'm waiting. And I didn't need you. And I said, why?